So as Dan mentioned, I'm the managing partner and CEO of MKA Insights, and I'm here to talk about commercialization frameworks for the biopharma ecosystem. A little bit about the firm. Many of you probably don't know who MKA Insights is, and that's okay. We're about 18 months young. Started in late 2017 with a background in working at Thermo Fisher, GE, VWR. To be frank, it's 2 consultants at the moment. We're continuing to grow, but our area of expertise is really in the tip of the spear type of initiatives that help companies grow and accelerate their growth. The area of focus is, the industries that we focus on are bioprocess, life sciences, clinical diagnostics, cell and gene therapy. And the 3 areas that we work with our clients on are globalization, going deeper in new markets. The other areas that we focus on are transformation exercises that typically are rooted in marketing and brand transformations, changing the way that we position or talk to our customers so that we can capture a broader audience. And then the third area that we focus on quite heavily is in growth planning. What does the 3 to 5 year plan look like for growing the business? So that should do it for the overview. I'm going to jump right into the slides for today, commercialization frameworks for the biopharma ecosystem. And I know that's an awful long title, and it comes from an article that I wrote that's in the April publication. So if you want, you can pick that up. The gist of it is captured in these slides. Having worked in industry for the better part of a decade, working at large corporations with very well vetted processes and exercises for growth planning, there's not a shortage of information, data, processes. I think where we are very short or what we lack is focus on some of the fundamentals. So taking a look back on the work that I've done in helping businesses, product lines, and organizations grow, I've tried to take probably 4 or 5 things that I think are fairly fundamental in driving commercialization strategies, and they're captured here. And it always starts by asking the right questions. I think we tend to dive into what we want to do without first asking some very basic questions that start with, why do we exist? What are our capabilities? What is the technology that we feel is our competitive advantage? What are the products and the organization and the people? And then asking the next question, which is, what is the unmet need? What is the customer challenge that we're trying to solve for? Not just we have something and people want to buy it. The reverse of that is, what do people want to buy? And we get so inundated in the great shiny thing that we have that we lose focus of what matters to the customer. So bringing that back into a customer relevant scope is very, very important. The next area is segments. How deep can we stratify? I've worked with a lot of organizations and they've got one market segment. It's called the world. The world are our customers. And so I've worked quite a bit in trying to get the clients and the customers we work with to think about stratification in a more tactile, hands-on, what is a smaller niche or group of target customers that we can go after and make a dent. And so stratification and better understanding who that customer segment is very, very important in building out the growth strategies. In the past, I firmly believe that history is somewhat predictive of the future, and we have the ability to change the future only if we can see what we've done in the past. And so what are our financials? What is our performance? Where have we made missteps? And how do we modify that to adjust based on what's happening in the industry? And what resources do we have that are going to allow us to achieve what we want to do? And then, of course, looking at the competition. What are they doing? What are they doing well? What are they not doing so well? Where's the opportunity for us as an organization to capitalize on an untapped opportunity? So I actually have quite a lot of questions that I ask when I work with clients, and this is probably the 5 or 6 that matter the most. And none of this is rocket science, and I'm sure everybody in this audience has seen this adoption curve. What I'm finding quite a bit in these conversations is that we've gotten away from the adoption curve. We've gotten away from some of the basic fundamentals of why customers buy, what they buy, and when. So one of the key topics or areas of focus that I try to bring forward to our clients is, where are you in this adoption cycle? And many of them, because they are relatively small or mid-size either as an organization or their latest product is a new product or a new technology, they tend to be on the far right, far left in terms of innovators and early adopters. So they've got some kind of traction, but they struggle to get massive or the majority to adopt their products or services. And that's because of this common dilemma, most notably studied by Jeffrey Moore, which is the chasm, crossing the chasm. It's the difference in buying patterns between your early adopters and early innovators and your early majority. Those early innovators and early adopters are like the Mac users when Mac first came out, and they were all about RAM and gigabytes and speed and all the things that don't matter to me because I'm an early majority. But when it started coming to, well, if I open my Mac fairly quickly, if I open the screen to my Mac, it's available to me right away. There isn't a 30-second downtime while the computer hums, and I can hit the ground running. That matters to me. I don't really care about gigabytes or RAM. And so changing the positioning by Mac allowed me as an early majority to understand that value proposition or the value of that product or service or that technology. And once you get the early majority, the late majority follows through. It's like a domino effect because they see others buying, they want to buy too. So this, again, not rocket science, well studied, but when we talk about commercialization strategies, people tend to overlook some of the basics. And so this topic and this conversation for today is really about going back to the basics. The next curve, and I've only got 3 that I really talk about, is the growth curve. So really trying to think about where are you on this growth curve, because your strategy and your commercialization planning really is dictated by where you are on this growth curve. If you're nascent, which is, you're close to nothing at this point, but you've got something, you've got an idea that's worth pursuing and you are pursuing it. And as you get more buy-in and people interested in your ideas, you move into this emerging sector, and how you go to market as an emerging technology or an emerging product, the messaging shifts and your strategy shifts, and you tend to have a little bit more funding so you can do a little bit more. You might also at this time want to explore distribution partnerships or some kind of go-to-market that goes away from your direct relationships with customers and broadening that reach. And once you do that, as you shift from nascent to emerging, you'll start to gain some traction and momentum as you'll gain speed and velocity, and you'll start to ramp up the growth curve. And this is where people really start to get excited because they start to see some solid single-digit, double-digit growth, and this is in the growing phase. And what you do here is also very, very important, and it's different than what you did previously in nascent and emerging. Maybe the focus now becomes more on branding and amplifying your business, so a lot more of the world that is your customer base knows who you are and wants to buy what you're offering. And inevitably, throughout industry, products, technology, and a company's growth cycle, you tend to approach a maturity level. It's where your growth starts to taper off quite a bit. And for some of us that are lucky, you're now not in double-digit growth, you're in high single-digit growth, coming down to 4 or 5% growth. This is a really telling time for a lot of the mature companies and technologies and industries. What do? Because you're faced with a decision to make. Do you continue to ride single-digit growth, or do you try and transform yourself, or do you decline? And so I'm not sure if the people in this audience would be very familiar with this, but the Thermo Fishers of the world have faced this. The biopharma industry as a whole has faced this. They've been faced with the patent cliff. And so when faced with the patent cliff, they chose to either dig in their heels and say, well, we're going to challenge the patent expiry. We're going to have new indications that prolong our patent expiry period. Or conversely, some biopharma companies have said, you know what, we're going to ride this wave and we're going to transform the way we go to market and we're going to enter the biosimilar space. So that's happened from an industry perspective, and that's also happened from a company or technology perspective. So dusting off the growth curve is very important to understanding what is your growth strategy or commercialization strategy. This I use fairly infrequently, but I think it's a telling slide or a telling graphic to show where are you in your growth versus market share dichotomy. So this is a slide that's built off of the BCG growth matrix, which is a consulting firm in Boston, fairly well recognized. And they've got really 4 quadrants. And this quadrant to the upper right, your visual upper right, is where you're growing fairly rapidly. You've got high growth and you've got high market share. You're a winner. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep winning. But for the rest of us who are in some of the other quadrants, you start to ask questions. Well, what do we do if we're not the winners and we're not the dominant market share player in a fast-growing economy? And so if we're a low growth but still high market share, what does that mean for us? Well, BCG says you're a cash cow. It means you're throwing a lot of money off. Take that money and reinvest it into something that's innovative. Take a risk, and maybe it will pay off. Or do nothing because it's a cash cow. But it's a cash cow. You'll continue to get revenue, but try and take a risk. This quadrant to the bottom left is what I call the opposite of winners. You're in a low growth economy or industry and you have a low market share. You should really be asking yourselves, what are we doing here? Should we stay? Should we choose to move into a different industry? Should we transform ourselves, or should we exit? This is not where we want to be, and we want to shift out of this quadrant. And then the last quadrant is the high growth, low market share, which, if you're in that area, the industry could continue to grow around you if you do nothing. And if that happens, you're going to drop down to being an opposite of a winner, and you'll have to exit the market. Or what you could choose to do is invest and innovate, and you'll shift to the right in a high growth, high market share position. And then the last slide, I think, is trying to tie it all together. So a lot of my background comes from being in the bioprocessing space, having come from a vendor perspective. I've been asked to talk about, well, what is the industry? How do you describe it? And so my challenge is that every description I've heard of it is either a 1D or 2D. I like to think of the biopharma ecosystem as a 4D dynamic, moving ecosystem that's propelled forward by time. And initially started with these fantastic ideas in Boston about what a biologic could be. And that really was the core of the biologics industry. Over time, it's transformed, it's moved outward as it's gained momentum and speed, and more ideas have come into the fold. People over time, or companies over time, have moved outwards and gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Yet there are some ideas and companies that have failed to thrive, and they've come together and gained economies of scale, and now they're slow to move outward, but they're moving outward. And then there are ideas that have just never moved forward. So that's the economy or the ecosystem as it's shifting forward across time. And the folks on the outskirts, we're seeing that quite a bit today, which is the transformation of the biopharma ecosystem, where they're moving into a newer space because they are innovating. They're moving into cell and gene therapy. They're moving into advanced therapies. They're moving into mRNA therapies. And so the industry is constantly shifting and changing and in dynamic. And if you're on the outskirts, you have a different kind of an opportunity to push the boundaries and push the industry as a whole into new directions. But if you're on the inside of this industry and if you're closer to that nebula that kicked off ideas, you have a long view. You can see those opportunities more clearly than the big guys on the exterior, and you can navigate a lot faster to the end goal in a shorter period of time than what it took some of those big guys on the exterior to get to. So that's how I think of the opportunities for the clients in biopharma ecosystem. So hopefully that's been helpful, and tried to be fast because I know we're behind time. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Kiran.
Sure.
Once again, if anyone has any questions right now is the time to raise your hand. If not, we are running slightly behind time, but we do have a couple of minutes, so I'm going to ask you a question if that's okay.
Yeah.
I love the graphics there. I love the graph, the adoption curve, and dusting off the growth curve and such. Pharma has generally been seen as pretty slow at adapting to new technologies and new ideas. So I'm kind of wondering how dynamic the biopharma space, the biopharma ecosystem is compared to other industries, if that's still the case.
I thought about that because as I think about how the industry continues shifting and where the biopharma industry is on the growth curve, I think I can go here. I don't think the industry waited until it was approached by the biosimilar patent cliff or the biologics patent cliff to transform in some regards, but it didn't in other regards. So cell and gene therapy continued to advance and innovate regardless of what was happening from a patent cliff. So I do believe that the pace of innovation is far greater in biopharma than it is in the small molecule, what I consider small molecule or the pharma space. And that's just because I think we've realized the value in the biologic space and targeting the disease or the target, the cancer causing mechanism in the body with a biologic that reduces the side effects. And now we're moving into personalized medicine and companion diagnostics. So there's a lot more that's happening in the biologics space than I would venture to guess is happening in pharma.
So in the same vein, the speed of innovation in biologics is faster than small molecules, and the speed of innovation in, say, cell and gene therapies would be faster than biologics, right?
Much faster. That is correct.
Well, Kiran, unless there are any other questions, I'd like to say thank you once again, and just remind everyone that Kiran will be joining the panel after the final presentation. So thank you, Kiran.